With so many aircraft designs put out there during World War II, it's only natural that every country would have their bad eggs. And in the UK's case, well, they had a handful, but the one we were to talk about today was the Blackburn Roc. Blackburn, of course, had a pretty bad go of it during the war. The Skua was underappreciated, but they also made the Botha, which was atrocious, just disgusting, in pretty much every conceivable way. The Roc is a bit closer to the Botha, though perhaps not nearly as unstable as the Botha was. But it still underperformed, and it gets a reputation as being one of the worst fighters of the war. Well, why? There's a few reasons. Let's talk about it. The origin of the Roc could be traced back to December 31st, 1935, when the Air Ministry issued Specification O.30/35, which sought a carrier-based turret-armed fighter for the Fleet Air Arm, or FAA. The Roc was designed as a derivative to the Skua, and as such they share many things in common in terms of overall appearance. But there were some differences. For example, the Roc had a turret. The Skua did not have this feature, and the fuselage was widened around the midsection to accommodate that turret. Bolt and Paul proposed their own P-85, which was a redesigned version of their own land-based turret fighter, which would become known as the Defiant. The Sea Defiant, as it was referred to, was actually expected to be faster than the Roc, but the Air Ministry still went with Blackburns instead. Additionally, I keep saying the words turret fighter. What the heck is a turret fighter? Why do these fighters have turrets? Usually turrets are mounted on bombing aircraft as defense, but the concept of a turret-armed defensive fighter came up during 1935, and they were meant to counter bomber threats at a time when the Royal Air Force thought that they'd be defending Great Britain against massed formations of unescorted enemy bombers. Back then, they didn't think the bombers would have fighters with them because the smaller aircraft wouldn't have the range to reach the UK from Germany. So the theory was that turret-armed fighters would approach an enemy bomber from below or from the side and lay into them with the turret. This idea was pushed so hard that both the Roc and the Defiant actually didn't even have forward-facing guns at all. Their only offensive weaponry was the turret, which is a perplexing decision because you'd think you'd want to at least have the option for forward-firing guns like a traditional fighter. I mean, heck, even the Devastator, which did have a machine gun in the rear, also had forward-firing guns as well, and it was a torpedo bomber. So even in context, it does seem like a perplexing decision, but they genuinely didn't think that fighters would be coming over the channel. They were wrong, but that's what they thought. But even based on this design, the Roc would prove to be somewhat underwhelming. It was a two-seat, low-wing, cantilever monoplane of an all-metal construction. It was fitted with a retractable tailwheel undercarriage, and its wings could actually be folded for storage aboard aircraft carriers. Attachment points for a float undercarriage were actually standard in this aircraft, unlike on the Skua, and the Roc retained the wing-mounted dive brakes present on the Skua, but the main plane was redesigned with a slight dihedral to obviate the upturned wingtips. It was powered by a Bristol Perseus radial engine that drove a three-bladed propeller, and the rear fuselage housed some marine equipment, including a collapsible dinghy in case they crashed in the water, because, well, it was a naval aircraft, so that makes sense. The Roc's primary armament was indeed that blasted turret. It was in fact the same Bolt and Paul Type A powered operated gun turret used on the Defiant, and it had four 7.7mm Browning machine guns. The turret could actually rotate in any direction, and the guns elevated as high as 85 degrees above the horizon. It was powered hydraulically, using an electrically driven pump, and the guns were fired electrically and had integrated automatic interruption to prevent the tail unit or propeller from actually being hit, which was a nice feature. Appreciate that. The Roc could also be equipped with two 250-pound bombs and 8 practice bombs, carried upon bomb tracks under each wing. On April 28, 1937, the Air Ministry would place an off-the-drawing-board order for 136 of the Rocs, though Blackburn would not wind up directly producing these aircraft. They already had full order books for both the Skua and the Botha, so they had to subcontract production out to Bolt and Paul, and delayed delivery of the Defiant. Indeed, the Air Ministry had ordered the Roc before it even flew for the first time. On December 23, 1938, the original prototype performed its maiden flight, and as testing continues, the attributes of the Roc were ironed out. Handling of the aircraft was actually very good. The Rocs could outmaneuver the Skua, though they weren't suitable for aerobatic maneuvers, but they were pretty steady in steep dives. However, this didn't help the speed element. The Roc, as it turned out, was painfully slow, like disgustingly, even by the standards of the time. The maximum speed the Roc could reach was only 223 miles per hour. And this was something that was quite obviously going to be a problem. Even if bombers showed up without fighter escorts, how could you shoot them down if you couldn't actually catch up to them? In fact, in October of 1938, the 5th Sea Lord, Alexander Ramsay, did issue his own recommendation that development of the Roc be abandoned entirely, but also the issue of producing them as seaplanes. See, part of the requirement was that they could operate as a float plane, and that's great and all, and they did convert some of the prototypes to do this, but, this didn't go smoothly. For one thing, in float plane configuration, they were even slower, only reaching 193 miles per hour, so that was wonderful. But the floats also caused them to have direction instability, disrupting the one benefit the Rocs had in that they were rather stable in the air. They weren't so with the floats attached, and it was so bad that they just abandoned that idea entirely. However, with the outbreak of World War II, the UK needed whatever they had, and the Roc turned out to be whatever they had. During April of 1939, preparations commenced for the Roc's entry into squadron service, and that same month the 5th production aircraft was delivered to the Central Flying School to assist with personnel familiarization. They were delivered to several squadrons and thrown into service, though even early on, they were described as being a constant hindrance by one of the squadron leaders, and that same man requested more Skuas instead. Yes, that's right. Everyone throws shade at the Skua, but the Roc was far worse, to the point that they wanted more Skuas rather than the Roc. Please, give us more Skuas. We are begging you. During the Allied campaign in Norway, a few of the Rocs were sent out on combat air patrols over the fleet, but were regarded as being completely worthless. They just couldn't do anything. Their slow speed meant that they couldn't intercept German aircraft at all. The Rocs would continue operation over the English Channel in the summer of 1940, in both Operation Dynamo and Operation Ariel, which was the evacuations of Allied forces from Dunkirk and other French ports. During this time, the Roc finally did something. Anything! Because, on May 28, 1940, one of the Rocs of the 806 Naval Air Squadron, flown by pilot midshipman A.G. Day, who was actually alongside two Skuas, intercepted 5 Junkers Ju-88s, which were attacking a convoy off Ostend in Belgium. A.G. Day obtained the sole aerial victory of the Rocs, when he, while flying underneath one of the Junkers, managed to destroy it, before returning to RAF Detling. That was it. That one Ju-88 was the one time the Roc managed to destroy an enemy plane. Mind you, it is a fighter. You'd think it'd be more than one, but no, it's embarrassing. On June 12th, both Rocs and Skuas of the 801st Naval Air Squadron wound up strafing and dive-bombed German E-boats. And on June 20th, Skuas and Rocs again were used to bomb gun emplacements at Cap Gris-Nez. In terms of ground attack roles, the Roc was alright, but again, that slow speed made them particularly vulnerable. After this, the Roc would be relegated to air-sea rescue and target towing duties at various locations. The production lines were actually still moving in that time, but they went straight to second-line squadrons, not front-line, because they were just worthless. They couldn't do anything. But they were stable flyers. That was their one benefit. As such, as air-sea rescue aircraft, they really weren't that bad, and the Roc almost managed to get a second kill during that. See, on September 26, 1940, during one of the rescue patrols, Pilot Officer D.H. Clark and his gunner Sergeant Hunt would engage with a Heinkel HE-59 seaplane, which was also out on a rescue mission, and had fired on them first. The aircraft would exchange fire until they reached the coast of France. When that happened, the Heinkel escaped in a rather damaged condition, robbing D.H. Clark and his gunner of their kill, but showed that the Rocs were pretty ferocious against aircraft that were slower than them. The HE-59s were really slow, even slower than the Rocs. As the war dragged on, the Rocs were used for less and less. Some were dispatched to distant locations like Bermuda, and the last pair of operational aircraft were withdrawn from service during June of 1943. And the last 4 Rocs that were stationed at HMS Daedalus in Gosport actually survived until late 1944, but not in airworthy condition. Ground forces at Daedalus were using their turrets from the ground as anti-aircraft defense, because those turrets were pretty good. It's just they were attached to a plane that couldn't take them very fast. A plane that didn't have any forward-facing armament. A plane that was outclassed by basically every other fighter in the air of the time. In these standalone documentary videos, I try to play good cop and explain certain factors that resulted in these planes being seen as bad, but in the Roc's case, the British already knew that it was subpar, even for the role it was chosen purely because of the speed, or lack of it. But they still put it into operation anyway so as not to disrupt the manufacturer. Which, I mean, I get there's economic issues to consider, but you're effectively paying them to produce a useless plane. One that you already knew was gonna be useless before the war started. But hey, I wasn't there to make that decision. I'm sure they had their reasons. And the Rocs were stable in the air. They were fine aircraft to fly. Just not to actually fight a war in, you know? And with that, a special thank you goes out to all my underwater train finders, Some Dude 267, Orange Glass, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Anzac A1, Arthur Roy, Brian, Jack Carson's Rora Videos, Lord Off 444, Mark Holding, Murder Jones Doll, A Person 723, Royal Hudson 2860, Iser 1405, Charles Kwiatkowski, Matt Weaver, Tom Red Lion, Ennis Productions 8104, Hendrick Motorsports Fan 5, Wheeljack 8401, Rescues Greyhounds, The Baxter, Caleb Crosswhite, Ohio Trucker 1, Andrew Bowen, Josh Johnson, Hayden DeGrow, Caleb Brainwanders, Prez Drenton, Master of None, The Arizona Hot Rail, Liam Wright, Mr. Sleepy, Travis Dolinsky, Jared Brussel, Dr. Racer 78, Joshua Long, Hannah Bird, Amtrak 2024 Productions, Tommy Rossini, and that guy with a beard. Till next time, this is Darkness and a Bidwell. Farewell.